Hello, and welcome to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, the show that takes you on a deep dive into the hidden corners of well-being, without forgetting to bring along a good sense of humor. I'm Ethan Foster, the fellow who believes that if you can't poke fun at life's absurdities, you might as well invest in a frown factory.
And I'm Alara Sky, the person who can't stop reading research reports if my life depended on it, and who occasionally tries to amuse you with the things I uncover. We're here to explore the nooks and crannies of natural health, maybe shatter a few myths, and remind you that your body is an incredible, if occasionally chemically confused machine.
Chemically confused is a perfect segue, Alara. Today we're talking about a sneaky visitor in your everyday environment. Whether you sniff it in that fresh new piece of furniture, or in the adhesives holding your plywood together, this sly intruder is called formaldehyde. Apparently it's lurking in more places than one might suspect.
True story. Formaldehyde is this uninvited guest that shows up in new homes, baby cribs, and the occasional pressboard office desk. It has a way of drifting through the air and planting itself in your lungs. Unfortunately, not with the best results.
Now, I always thought that suspicious stinging odor in a brand new car was something akin to new car excitement. Turns out it's more like new car chemical soup.
Precisely. That popular new car smell can be chock full of formaldehyde off-gassing from interior materials. But hey, enjoy that fancy interior. Just don't overdo the deep sniffs.
Let me guess. When it comes to a chemical like formaldehyde, there's some debate about how safe it is.
You would guess correctly. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency recently walked a tightrope with its 2024 formaldehyde assessment. They pointed out serious health risks like cancer, asthma, and even fertility problems. But after some spirited dialogue, if we want to be polite, between certain government officials and chemical industry reps, the final language somehow ended up softer than what their earlier draft suggested.
Sounds like a classic scenario of, it's definitely a hazard, but is it hazard enough to do something about it right now? Or should we, talk about unreasonable risk?
Apparently so. The earlier draft called formaldehyde an unreasonable risk to people who spend time near certain industrial facilities or work directly with the chemical. But come final release day, the language had been massaged.
Massaged is a polite way of saying toned down.
Precisely. And don't forget the folks living in fence-line communities, areas super close to big manufacturing plants. The final document seemed to shrug off the risk to outdoor air.
Right, because if it's outdoors, it just magically disappears.
Exactly. That's the questionable logic. Anyway, let's step back and talk about what formaldehyde is and how it ends up in your office desk or the plywood floors of your living room.
I'm intrigued. Formaldehyde is this simple organic molecule, right? But with a not-so-simple impact on the human body.
Simple indeed. It's basically a gas with a strong, pungent odor. When combined with other chemicals in its liquid form, it becomes a staple in adhesives, resins, and preservatives. So you'll find it in pressed wood products like particle board and plywood.
Wait, so that means my living room cabinet made from compressed wood scraps is held together by a resin that might be releasing formaldehyde into my air.
Yep. It's what we call off-gassing, a fancy term for slowly leaking chemical vapors over time. And it especially happens in warmer or more humid conditions. Think of it as the chemical equivalent of a bad houseguest who refuses to leave and periodically announces itself through your nose and lungs.
Or as the chemical that welcomes me when I walk into my newly renovated kitchen, my eyes tearing up in joy. Actually, that might be from the formaldehyde.
Very possible. Indoor air is often more polluted than outdoor air because of all the products and building materials that release chemicals in an enclosed space.
So, we have a pretty comprehensive list of concerns. Respiratory irritation, watery eyes, nose and throat annoyance, and the big one, cancer risk.
Right. According to multiple studies, formaldehyde is strongly linked to certain cancers, particularly those in the nasal passages and nasopharyngeal region. Also, there's a noted increase in asthma risk, especially in children. One study discovered that every increase of 10 micrograms per cubic meter was associated with a 10% higher asthma risk in kids.
Yikes. That's not just a handful of data. That's a pretty consistent research trail, right?
Indeed. And the EPA's own findings reflect that formaldehyde is not something to take lightly, though apparently that didn't stop certain industry groups from telling the EPA to slow its roll.
Let me guess, the American Chemistry Council and some big players complained that stricter standards would cost jobs, hamper the economy, and endanger the livelihood of pressed wood furniture everywhere.
Pretty much. And the debate is always about balancing public health with economic implications. But it's tough to see how you balance a potential cancer risk with a quick corporate profit.
Especially if your living room furniture is quietly turning your home into a low-level hazard zone.
Exactly. Meanwhile, House Republicans and various chemical industry advocates have tried to discredit the EPA's formaldehyde findings. Some have asked the incoming administration to override the entire 2024 report, claiming the data is unscientific.
That's a powerful label, but if the majority of independent scientists disagree, well, I'd wager there's something else at play. Possibly a financial incentive.
You said it, not me. But yes, there was a chemical industry insider placed in a high EPA position during the Trump era. He once worked for Koch Industries, a massive conglomerate that uses formaldehyde and invests heavily in formaldehyde-based materials.
So that might explain why the agency sat on certain toxicity reports and eventually presented a final version that was kinder and gentler to formaldehyde's image.
Precisely. But that doesn't do much for the folks exposed at work or at home.
Right? Because if you're a factory worker handling formaldehyde-based products every day, your risk is going to be a tad higher than me playing 20 questions with my new bookcase.
Indeed. And especially for families living near industrial facilities that release formaldehyde and other chemicals into the environment.
So we know there's an industry versus regulation battle happening. Meanwhile, you and I, average citizens, are basically stuck in the middle, hoping for the best. But you usually have some practical tips for these conundrums, right?
I do. And while we can't personally rewrite EPA regulations, we can do a few things to limit our exposure. Let's start with ventilation. The simplest way to minimize formaldehyde in your home is to open windows and let fresh air replace the stale, chemical-laden air indoors.
Fresh air? What a concept. Let me guess, you can also use exhaust fans in the kitchen, bathroom, or anywhere else you might have adhesives or cleaning solutions wafting around.
Exactly. Also, look for low emission or formaldehyde-free labels whenever you buy new plywood furniture, laminate floors, or certain textiles. Sometimes that label might read something like CARB compliant or Toxic Substances Control Act compliant.
So if you're about to purchase that trendy Scandinavian bookshelf, it's worth double-checking if it meets a standard that helps reduce formaldehyde emissions.
For sure. Another practical tip. When you buy new furniture or a new carpet, let it air out in a garage or a covered outdoor space for a few days. Give those chemicals time to dissipate before introducing them to your living room.
I have an image of me pointing a fan at my brand new recliner while wearing one of those comedic face masks. Let's get rid of the fumes before the recliner can get too cozy.
That visual might be comedic, but it actually helps. And you'd be doing your lungs a favor.
What about houseplants? I recall reading something about certain plants that can help filter toxins.
Indeed, there's a NASA study. Yes, NASA looked into houseplants for air purification, suggesting that plants like spider plants, Boston ferns, and peace lilies can reduce formaldehyde to some extent. They're not miracle workers, but they can help.
So, if I keep a mini jungle in my living room, maybe it's not just about interior design. It's also an air quality hack.
That's right. Combine that with a high-quality air purifier, and you can significantly reduce your exposure to various indoor pollutants, formaldehyde included.
That's good to know, because let's face it, we live in a chemical-laden world. Expecting zero exposure to everything is probably not feasible, but reducing that exposure is within our reach.
Precisely. That's what I tell people. You can't live in a bubble, but you can be proactive about the bubble you have, namely your home.
The bubble I have is definitely made of particle board and questionable adhesives. It's good to know that if I open a window, invest in some plants, and look for better products, I'll be steering in the right direction.
Exactly. And for folks who want to push the envelope further, check if companies disclose their materials. Some furniture makers are more transparent about which adhesives they use or whether they meet green standards. Over time, consumer demand can push the market towards safer alternatives.
One of the few times consumer demand might result in something beneficial, as opposed to, say, more flavors of artificially dyed snack foods.
Hey, I'm all for the healthy, safer kind of consumer demand. So let's talk about one more angle, the health consequences. We've got the immediate irritation, the asthma risk, and fertility issues that have been linked to formaldehyde. The concern is that the average family might not link a mild, persistent cough to their new dining set, but there could be a correlation.
Right, especially for children who are more sensitive. If the child's bedroom has a brand new compressed wood bed frame that's off-gassing all night, that might contribute to respiratory or allergy-like symptoms.
Indeed. Although disclaimers aside, we encourage people to pay attention to their indoor environment. It can be something as simple as noticing, my home feels stuffy, and when I open the window, I feel better.
Right, and that's less about being paranoid, more about being informed, and it sounds like Dr. Mercola wanted people to understand this chemical's ubiquity so they can take steps to mitigate it.
Precisely. He's been highlighting that formaldehyde is in everything from building materials to cleaning products. Yes, some cleaning products contain small levels of it. Even some fabrics and clothes can be treated with formaldehyde-based solutions.
Like those wrinkle-free shirts that never seem to need ironing, they might come preloaded with a small serving of chemicals.
You got it. Wrinkle-free might be convenient, but it may come with a whiff of formaldehyde-based finishing.
Well, I certainly appreciate crisp collars, but I'm less enthusiastic about inhaling known carcinogens.
Maybe you can do some old-fashioned ironing. Who knows, you might find it therapeutic.
I'm not sure about therapeutic, but I'll weigh that against breathing in formaldehyde. So, what's the final verdict on formaldehyde from Dr. Mercola's perspective?
Dr. Mercola emphasizes that we should remain vigilant, understanding that regulatory bodies might be influenced by industries defending their financial interests. That means you, as an individual, should take charge and reduce exposure as best you can.
Good ventilation, low emission products, pre-airing new furniture, possibly air purifiers and houseplants. Those are the big steps, right?
Yes, and also simply being aware, reading labels and trusting your nose. If something smells strongly chemical or makes your eyes sting, that's often a clue.
It's like the canary in the coal mine, except the canary is your sinus passages going, ow, ow, ow.
Precisely. Now, there's also a bigger picture. If enough people insist on safer standards, industry might eventually innovate better adhesives that don't rely so heavily on formaldehyde.
That might take a while, but consumer pressure has changed product formulas before, right? We've seen it with BPA in plastics and certain flame retardants in mattresses.
Exactly. We have more power than we think, especially collectively.
Let's also talk about the fence line communities for a moment. Those areas near manufacturing plants might see more consistent exposure because of what's being released into the air.
Yes. The final EPA report concluded that outdoor exposure wasn't a major threat, but that conclusion wasn't exactly well supported by the earlier drafts. People living near factories may face significant risks.
Right, especially if you can practically smell the fumes when you're in your backyard.
Precisely. That's why some folks feel let down by the final version of the EPA's formaldehyde assessment. They worry it didn't address the heavier burden some neighborhoods face.
That's where local activism and awareness can come into play. But that might be a larger conversation than we have time for.
True. Let's keep our focus on personal steps to stay safe.
Another question. Are there certain professions that need to be extra careful with formaldehyde?
Yes, some occupations see higher exposure, like workers in the furniture manufacturing sector, hair salon professionals using products with formaldehyde-based preservatives, and factory employees in tire manufacturing. All of them might encounter higher concentrations.
So better protective measures, better ventilation, and hopefully safer product formulations.
Exactly. Until the day comes when everyone acknowledges that short-term economic gains can't outweigh long-term health consequences.
You'd think that would be common sense, but apparently it's not always so common.
Right. Which is why we're here to talk about it, help folks make informed choices, and maybe share a laugh or two along the way.
Let's pivot slightly. We've discussed the dangers, the corporate controversies, and the personal steps. One aspect I'm curious about. If you've already got a house full of older furniture, is that better or worse?
Typically, older furniture has already gone through a significant amount of off-gassing. So, ironically, you might be better off with older items that have had time to release their formaldehyde.
So the phrase vintage furniture might be trendy, but there's also a health bonus, less formaldehyde vapor.
Precisely. That's one reason why rummage sales or antique finds can sometimes be a safer bet than brand new, less expensive pieces using pressed wood. Not to mention, you might find some unique style points.
Perfect. I can claim I'm going retro chic, while really just saving my airways from a chemical cloud.
A noble cause if I ever heard one.
So, to summarize for our listeners, formaldehyde is widely used in building materials, furniture, and even certain fabrics. It can irritate eyes and lungs, contribute to asthma, cause more serious issues over time, and has a proven link to certain cancers. The EPA's final 2024 assessment underscores these risks, although not as strongly as some earlier drafts indicated.
Yes. And while we can't magically remove all formaldehyde from the world, we can limit our exposure by improving ventilation, choosing low formaldehyde products, letting new purchases off-gas in a safe space, and possibly including helpful houseplants.
That's the practical approach, and I assume that reading up on product labels is crucial.
Absolutely. Though reading product labels can feel like deciphering hieroglyphics sometimes, it's worth doing.
I never thought the day would come when I'd be scanning for formaldehyde levels on the side of a dresser box, but here we are.
If it helps keep you healthy, it's time well spent.
So, Ilara, as we wrap up, any final words of wisdom for our lovely audience?
The big takeaway is that knowledge is power. Understanding how formaldehyde can sneak into your home or workplace lets you make better choices. Even small steps, like opening a window or waiting a few days to let new furniture air out, can make a big difference in your indoor air quality.
Good point. Sometimes we think we need a dramatic overhaul of our entire lives, but modest actions add up, especially if they become regular habits.
Yes. And for those of you feeling fired up about broader change, keep paying attention to regulatory developments. Public demand for healthier products has been known to shift corporate strategies.
Well said. Folks, that's a wrap on today's episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. We hope this chat will help you breathe easier, literally.
Thank you for tuning in and letting us tickle your funny bone while also hopefully saving you from an excess of chemical fumes.
Join us next time when we'll tackle another topic that merges health, humor, and the occasional eyebrow raise. Until then, I'm Ethan Foster.
And I'm Alara Sky. Wishing you fresh air, informed purchases, and plenty of lively discussion. Stay aware, stay curious, and remember, your cells might be tiny, but they appreciate every breath of cleaner air you can give them.
Take care, everyone.
See you soon.